Welcome to SEL in EDU.
where we discuss all things social and emotional in education.
I'm Krista.
And I'm Craig, and we are your hosts on this journey.
All right, SEL and EDU family. It's a great day because you can hear us, and this is a gift. So we're excited to start out with an incredible conversation with a very special guest. Krista, how are you doing? How's your heart today?
Oh, my heart is doing very well. I know we often talk about weather, but it is incredible how it feels when the sun is coming out. I got to see my boys over this past weekend, so I'm feeling very fulfilled, and I've got some trips coming up to learn more about educational systems. And so, I feel like I'm living my best life right now. Life is good. How about you, Craig?
Well, how does one follow up with that? I'm just saying. So for me, I mean, my heart is full as well. I think what is redemptive is knowing that new life and rebirth is happening. And so I know a lot of folks be thinking about, you know, the top of the year, I got these goals and I got these things that I'm trying to do. And by now, which is like spring, early spring, folks have, let those fitness goals, things go away and, they doing new things. So for me, I'm a full-time education consultant. Life has been going fairly well. Married life as well. The hubby is not kicking me out for some reason. Yeah, we'll see. And the whole
Oh, come
look,
on.
look, there are things and there are things. But I'm also looking forward to a great deal of travel that's going to be coming up soon. So, yeah, that's what's exciting.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of travel, I met our guest when I was out in Illinois it feels like it was just a couple weeks ago, but I feel like it was maybe a couple months. And he was just incredible. His passion for education, for serving students, for helping build bridges between caregivers and the school systems. And I'm like, sir, I need you to come on the podcast and help us and educate us and share your expertise and your enthusiasm. And so I am so excited to have Kevin Hopkins join us. He has worked as a family engagement professional in at-risk communities for 5 years. His work with the families of pre-K through 12th grade students includes creating and facilitating personal and professional development workshops, direct and indirect family advocacy, data management, content development, and community outreach. I am so thrilled to have the amazing Kevin Hopkins join us. Kevin, how are you and how is your heart today?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thank you for asking, and I am very, very pleased to be here. I really appreciate this privilege. As far as my heart is full. I'm actually having a really good day. I'm coming off of a little bit of rest from earlier today. This has been a very good and productive week for me, and I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while now.
Yeah, thank you. Us too. And so I'm going to kick it off by asking you about your role, because when we talk about SEL and we talk about SEL in education, it's often what's happening in the classrooms or in the schools. But
Right.
we know this is, as I described, like 360 support for our students. We don't do
Mhm.
this in a vacuum or alone. Our
Right.
students have families and caregivers and parents who are there with them in a variety of ways. And we know that people's home lives all look different, and everybody's doing the best that they can and that they know how.
Right.
And so I'm curious if you could describe for us what your role looks like and what the goal is when you're working between educators and the families and students.
Okay. So I'll definitely get to that specific question, but I feel as if I need to prep listeners with a little bit of my background because my background definitely makes the difference in how I approach what I do. Okay. So I'm 56 years young, so I'm not a spring chicken. I grew up in a completely different era than we're experiencing now. I'm the youngest of five children. I'm the only boy, and there's an 8 year age gap between myself and my youngest sister, and a 15-year age gap between myself and my oldest sister, right? My mother who will be turning 90 pretty soon, was a Head Start teacher by day and a bank custodian after hours. And although she was a teacher, she did not force me to do homework. That job was left to my sisters, right? My mother allowed me to have a great deal of independence, and she was loving, but not overbearing, right? Now, my stepdad, who died shortly after I graduated from college, was honorably discharged from the Army and worked for Greyhound until his retirement. So, blue collar. They were separated for most of my youth, but when he visited from California, we'd go around and do the father and son thing, visiting family, playing baseball, the fake boxing, and, fishing, those kinds of things, right? I grew up in what would now be defined, as you mentioned, as an at-risk community, which is East St. Louis, Illinois. We lived in the Orweathers housing projects until I was about 12 years old. And our apartment was the gathering place for many of the kids in our building because it seemed like every Christmas I got every toy that I circled in the Sears catalog. And many people won't even know what that is nowadays, but it's been replaced by Amazon and the like. But be that as it may, I walked with or rode the bus to school with the friends that I grew up with until I graduated from high school and went away to college at Illinois State University. So the bonds between us were tight. I mean, I'm 56 years old and we still have class reunions of the sort at different locations around the city. So now, fast forward, all these years, I'm the divorced father of two Gen Z daughters, ages 24 and 25, and they both have college degrees. And unlike my mother, I am admittedly and unapologetically overprotective. They can do no wrong, but when they do wrong, they get the dad talks that I did not get when I was growing up, right? And I believe in my heart of hearts that those conversations and corrections have tremendously influenced their life outcomes thus far. Now, that said, I would categorize myself as a passionate and critically creative person. I've been a visual artist for a long time, as long as I can remember, in fact. I paint, I do computer graphics, I'm a photographer, I enjoy creative writing, song lyrics, and traditional poetry. And last year, I published a children's book. And here's a shameless plug, sorry. Dakota Doesn't Have to Worry.
Don't
And
be
it's
sorry.
about, okay.
You
Okay,
plug
I take that
away. We're
back.
putting the
All
links to this.
all right, sounds good. So the book is about the anxiety that preschool age children and their parents deal with as they transition into kindergarten. And in all honesty, my well-being is rooted in my happiness in three key areas, right? That's my relationship with myself, which is my alone time, time to just think or do nothing. My relationship with my art, that's the creative time and being lazy and not wasting time. And my relationship with my significant other. So I'm recently engaged and she works in the same arena. Thank you. Child Protective Services. And so when we first met, we had an in-depth discussion about how important it is to keep these three areas of my life balanced, in order for me to be happy. Now, I didn't mention family because to me, family is an obligation and it supersedes all these things, depending on the family member, of course. And I didn't mention spirituality either because that's something that's embedded and I try to filter all of my energy through that lens. So, getting to what I actually do, I view the work that I do in comparison to my upbringing. And I see that things can be the same or that they technically might be the same because I'm working in the same environment, more or less, that I worked in or grew up in as a child, right? So, as you mentioned, for the past 5 years, I've worked in family engagement in an at risk community, again, the same one that I grew up in. I found myself on this path after 25 plus year career in advertising and marketing, art direction, public relations, sales, and a very brief career in juvenile justice. And ironically, that made the biggest impact on what I do now, in the second act of my life. And so just to kind of, give you an idea of how that impacted me, within 1 year of service as a juvenile case manager, I saw 3 young men go to jail for lengthy sentences. And we're talking teenagers, right? That committed adult crimes. Another young man on my caseload was shot, and 2 others were killed, and this is all within a year. And these were young people that expressed a desire to change, with the exception of one, but had no safe arena or platform upon which that change could be sustained. And when talking with them, in one way or another, they all pointed to their childhood as the starting point of their problems, right? Either through parental contact with law enforcement, being misled by an older sibling or someone in their neighborhood, or pure and simple ignorance of the long-term consequences of being involved in criminal mischief and later felonious activity, right? So those things definitely played a role in my decision to switch over to family engagement. So the opportunity came along, um, and I said, hey, if I can make this switch into engagement with the experience that I've had through marketing, the experience that I've had now through juvenile justice, I really feel that I could make an impact. And so when the opportunity presented itself, I made the jump, and I have not regretted it, and I have not looked back since. So when I show up, it's with my experiences from those two areas in mind as compared to my own childhood. Again, same place, same neighborhoods, different times. And when I think about how my life could have gone, in comparison to how those young men's lives went, if it were not for the influence of my family and a couple of very influential teachers along the way, we would not be having this conversation today. I believe that completely.
Well, thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself. So, I mean, just right off the bat, it sounds like a very rich and complex tapestry that you have shared in regards to your own upbringing, what has served as your center and inspiration, as well as navigating um, the complexities of humans who are hurt and um, are hurting, and being present and being a support, and standing in the gap for them. And, and even though I'm not a parent yet, I have been in working in schools for 20 some years.
Right.
And I know today's times, um, the environment is much different in regards to what parenting looks like, and the demands on lives of those who have young people in today's schools. And so I would love to hear a little bit more context about, well, how do you wake up every day and engage in this work? What is the arc of the work that you do? What are you proud of in
Okay.
regards to what you have the opportunity to do? And you know, just shed some light on yeah.
On how
That
my
great
day
work.
looks. Okay, no problem at all. So when I began with the school district that I work in now, again, this is the same school district that existed when I was a kid. I came in as a parent engagement specialist at the preschool level. So all of my work was focused on parents and guardians of young children, how to get them better educated and acclimated to the educational environment. And some had children already, so that school in particular was not new to them, but we, as a program, as a school, wanted to take a different approach. The program that my position was funded by was called Preschool for All. And so when I thought of preschool for all, I imagined it to be an opportunity for everyone to relearn the education system. So our charge as a team, and my charge as a team leader initially, was to put together some programming that reintroduced parents to what it meant to be a guiding force in their child's life. So we would have professional development workshops. We bring in community entities, stakeholders to put on workshops to teach parents about the different ways that they could either set aside money and save, about the different resources that were in the communities, how to eat healthy, how to keep themselves safe, and how to basically be that at-home support for what was happening within the classrooms. Because we all know classroom time is very limited, but learning takes place 24 hours a day, with the exception of the time that your child is asleep. And the one thing that was drilled in my head from the very first day in that system was that a parent is a child's first teacher. Now, I heard this every year through several people at almost every workshop that I went to. And although a parent is a child's first teacher, that does not mean that learning from that parent ends when teachers are introduced to that child. The child continues to learn from that parent based on their activities and what they observe and what they actually tell that child. In fact, I would say that the parent's influence is far more important on the child than what they learn in the classroom. And it can be, because again, that's the first teacher, that's where their source of nurturing comes from, and that's the through line for almost all of their lives. Now, as the program developed, I was ultimately promoted to a family engagement specialist throughout the district. So now my responsibilities went from pre-K all the way up to 12th grade parents. Now the responsibilities have changed, but it's essentially professional development, problem solving, resource allocation. We bring in people now to kind of help parents find a job, get back to school. We troubleshoot with the building administrators, the building counselors, to find solutions for specific families, for specific children. And we do data tracking at the locations to just kind of see which trends are emerging and which direction those trends are taking us. Because most schools put different initiatives in place and they hope and pray that they'll work, right? But there's usually no data tracking. And with the background that I had, which is the advertising and marketing, the question was, well, how do we even know if this stuff is effective if we're not looking at the outcomes and the impact? So we began setting up spreadsheets for our center, which was, the headquarters for the school district, and for each of the school buildings. We established some parent engagement teams, which included parents at each location, and we asked that they report back the data, the attendance from the different events that they were having, so that we can begin to see which events were getting the most traffic, where they were putting their efforts, and what kind of feedback we were getting from parents in relation to the information that they were getting. And more importantly, whether those events were having an impact on their connectivity to the school district and the outcomes for the students.
When you think about all of this work that you've been putting in and those trends that are emerging, I'm curious, what advice would you give to schools based on what you're seeing?
Okay.
I do have a follow-up question, but I'm going to hold it for a moment. But
Okay.
I'm really curious to see, what has been working? What are people excited about? What have they been attending, and what are they looking for?
Okay. So I'll start with this one, and this one may be a tough pill to swallow for a lot. Attendance and engagement are not the same things. You can have a high level of attendance at an event, but there be no engagement at the event. And for example, we'll have an event like, donuts with dads or muffins with moms, and we may have a couple of hundred people come out, but there won't really be much engagement in terms of information sharing, questions being asked, personal relationships with the families being built. Now, to some degree, that's left to the parent engagement teams at the schools, but it's a work. It's something that has to be established, I would say, at the beginning of the school year, because in my opinion, if you don't make a connection with those families within the first month and a half or less, they are lost because they settle into the routines of their lives, either dropping their children off to school, getting back to work, or just doing whatever they do throughout the day. And they feel as if they've left their child in good hands, right, with the school, without knowing what we always preach, which is the parent is the child's first teacher, and that the more involved the parent is, the better the outcomes are for the child. So we let them go because keeping track of them to some degree becomes just another job that someone has to do, but we don't realize the impact that it has on that child's education and ultimately on our relationship with the family when and if a problem arises. For the most part, if they don't get a phone call from the school until there's a problem, then they've got a problem with that.
And you know what? That makes sense to me. Like, you're only going to reach out if there's an issue, and only want my help or my perspective when you're hitting up against a mismatch for whatever reason. Like, it can't just be when there's a problem or an issue. It's, we're in this from the start at the very beginning. And I think that's an excellent reminder for people that, we have to start at the proverbial ground zero, right? Not wait until like, hey, by the way, it's October or November and here's what we're seeing. Like, we needed you at the beginning, and you needed to show us that we were important and valuable at the beginning.
Absolutely. The other thing that we're seeing too is, something that a lot of people don't talk about. We start off with a trust deficit, right? In many communities, the school has been there forever, right? So the same parents that now have children reflect on the times when they were mistreated or felt as if they were an outsider, and they carry that memory into their experiences, their new experiences with their child. So they bring an attitude, if I could say, to the door. And when they re-experience or are re-traumatized with those same experiences with new teachers and a new generation that's now meant to educate their most loved possession, their child, then they tend to react in ways that we don't appreciate and we don't seem to understand, without realizing that, hey, this is something that has been set up since before I was an employee in this district.
Craig, do you mind if I ask my follow-up question? Okay, thank you. I'm just checking. We kind of go back and forth, and I know he's got things as well. I had written down, and I love the way that you said this, that you had conversations and corrections growing up. And that's how I like to think about things too. Like, it's a conversation and a correction, not necessarily like there's natural logical consequences. And I think that the bigger word that goes with that you had mentioned was communication. And how are we working in tandem with each other? And based on your work with the families and the parents and the caregivers, do you have recommendations on how we as educators could better communicate or help people feel more comfortable with a communication if they've had a bad experience in education? Like, what has worked? What would be a welcoming way to re-engage people again when they've been hurt in the past?
Absolutely. It really kind of starts with hello, introducing yourself. In many cases, what we find is that parents don't even know who their child's teacher is. They haven't received an introductory letter, a phone call, an email, and so they've just turned their child over to a system and they have no real point of contact. Nowadays, it's hard to even get into the school past a security guard, and rightfully so. But you still want to know that you have an inside person that you can reach out to. If you have an issue with your child at home, you can convey that information. If there are some concerns that you have as a parent, you can ask that teacher, hey, well, what have you been seeing at school? And without that level of connectivity, there's no effective communication between the school and the parent. And unfortunately, the child is the person that falls through the cracks and suffers the consequences. And the school and the parent are both pointing the finger at one another, all while the child suffers.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you share a common philosophy with me about our parents and caregivers being our children's first teachers, because sometimes people lose sight that you actually are getting this wonderful gift from people who have their own traditions, rituals, upbringing, dreams, aspirations, and more. And they have a cultural richness. They have within what I consider to be culturally and linguistically prosperous communities. And I've talked at length in different conversations about sometimes there's a lost sight on the fact that our um, our young people are the best gifts that their parents had. They're presenting to you the best that they have. And our parents have, the tools that they have, and they're looking for a partnership with
Absolutely.
schools. And I really appreciate your strengths-based, assets-based framing for this. And in today's environment, I think about this time last year when I was leading a school and in the building, and parents have more needs today than they may have had over the last couple of decades. Housing costs are astronomical. We're seeing a lot more transiency because families can't stay unified within a particular community because they can't afford to stay there.
Right.
Gentrification is real in many parts of the United States. There's a lot of food deserts, especially for healthy, nutritious food that our young people can access at the corner stores, at bodegas, and sometimes in school buildings. So they rely heavily on what is accessible, which is junk food that doesn't fuel their bodies, but it's the best. Sometimes it may represent the best that they have at the time because that's what they have access to. And we understand that many of our families and caregivers also may be working several jobs in order for them to make sure that there's clothes on the backs of the children that they have, food in their bellies, and their ability to get to and from wherever they need to go. And so I'm just curious, in the work that you are leading now, what are some of the strategies and ways that you have found success in strengthening partnerships with families individually or with schools? And because I understand that sometimes schools or particular members in school communities lose sight of the very thing I started with, which is, parents are our children's first teachers, which I agree with you wholeheartedly. Too, that they come with so much, and sometimes people think that, oh, this parent, this family, this neighborhood doesn't have, and I'm like, they actually have a lot. If you really were open. So I'm just kind of curious with what are the ways that you are engaging families? What feels successful? Where are you seeing pockets of magic that's happening in regards to the work you lead?
Okay. So once a week, we have a virtual parent meeting. Um, and in that meeting, everyone in the district is invited to attend. Teachers, families, even the students can attend if they can sneak away or if they happen to be on a down period, right? They can chime in. During those meetings, we discuss whatever the issue of the day is, or whichever issues the parents, the families raise themselves. So we don't necessarily come in with an agenda. So if I'm having a concern about something that's happening at the high school, the middle school, as a parent, I can raise that concern within this meeting, which is an hour, and I can share my experience. I can find out whether or not other families have had the same experience, and because I'm a member of a team that's directly connected to the superintendent and to the cabinet of the school district, we can either directly address those questions and concerns or go straight to the top and say, hey, this is a serious concern that's growing and it needs to be addressed immediately before it gets out of hand. So we do have that leverage. It's also effective because it allows parents to connect with one another, right? What we ultimately want is there to become a community within the community of parents that cooperate and share their best practices and share their experiences so that each one can help their child prosper and become more well educated, right? We learn from that process as well as a team because we get to see what's working for them and what their actual concerns are. And when they raise those concerns, we have the opportunity to say, you know what, we need to create a workshop, we need to create a training around these concerns. Many times when we bring a student into a school district, we assume that a parent has read the student handbook. We assume that a child has read the handbook, although they sign it. They have to sign that as a part of the enrollment process. It does not mean that they have read it, and it definitely does not mean that they have understood the policies written within that handbook. So the onus is on the district to explain to the parents, to the students, what their rights and responsibilities are. And we have turned that into a process within which everyone is blinded. And so when something comes up, it's escalated to the highest priority because there was no initial understanding. And so when we bring parents in, when we have these open houses, when we have orientations, we have to take that time to actually begin developing a relationship, let them know what the opportunities for learning more about enrollment are, more about opportunities and enrichments within the district, and learning more about what their actual rights are. And more importantly, identifying who they can come to if they have a concern. Because many times things are escalated because a person has been sitting and brooding, a problem has been brooding. They don't know where to go with it. They talk to other parents, that parent doesn't know. And when they call a secretary, that secretary at the school may not have the best information, or they may have had a bad day. So what you'll get is, put on hold for a few minutes before you come back, and then you hear, I'll have someone call you back. And so the problem continues to brood. And then when we hear about it, it's critical, it's an explosion. And that's something that could have been avoided way, way in the past before it's turned into someone yelling and screaming at the security guard wanting to see the principal or at a board meeting. And it's those kinds of things that set up the bad blood between school districts and the families that they are meant to serve. When the parent talks about the school district, who's in the room with them? That child. Does that conversation that child overhears influence what they think about the teacher and the school? Absolutely. So now when that child goes to school, they have a whole different attitude about the learning process, and it affects their outcomes. And so that partnership that you mentioned that is so critical has to be established from the beginning. And that's only done through effective and compassionate communication. We cannot look at parents as just people that are sending their child to school. We have to view them, in my opinion, in the same way that corporate America does, as a customer that we have to keep happy and we have to keep them coming back, because more and more now, school choice is becoming a thing. And although in the past they were relegated to a different district, it's not the same as it used to be. If we had an exodus in our school district of, let's say, 1,000 children, we would have some serious employment problems.
Well, I think that's it's important to hold that. Uh, I think about I hold so many parents who, God knows, they found me right at the parking lot. Mr. Martin, Mr. Martin, hey, hi.
Right.
What's going on? You ain't get my email that so-and-so and tell you that. I'm like, okay, well, why don't you tell me what it is now so that we can find out
Absolutely.
what it is? And it's also making sure not only that they feel heard, but that you restate what you've heard. Like, here's what I'm hearing. I want to make sure I'm clear because I may not like this. Your presentation is the first time I'm hearing about it. Can I actually get back to like give me 24 hours? Let me do some investigation so I can get back to you with something. And I think that what is also something I hold when I think about my experiences in time in leading schools, but also what I would want as a parent. Um, our parents come and they do the very best that they can, and sometimes we don't bring them into better understand like this is the language of what we do, this is how we do what we do. I know parents have a lot of responsibility, so they don't always want that level of education, but you also have to figure out what is the creative way for them to be seen and know here's where your gifting could be very supportive to what we're doing. And knowing your kid shows up is an investment in the school, is an investment in that kid. Knowing that, you do follow up with a text message or something like that. It may not be in the timeline that a teacher or school wants, but that's their way of trying to stay connected to the thing. And I think that where, we find this tension is we're not having enough conversations. Schools are not necessarily always community based, where families and the staff, like we see in Abbott Elementary, may live around the community.
Right.
We're seeing
Right.
such a very, a very expansive um, community where parents could be coming from two towns over to actually get their kid to school, or and vice versa for so many others. So I appreciate what you shared from the lens that you shared it. Thank you.
Absolutely. And a lot of it depends too on who's greeting that child or that parent at the door. Typically there's a security guard, and we know that a security guard's job is to keep the facility secure. So you may not get the warmest greeting or the biggest smile from a security guard, but someone has to be there to counter that experience, right? So if you got someone whose job it is to make parents feel welcome, like a family engagement person or a principal or an assistant principal, that person should also be there to just provide a balance. And like you mentioned, to give an immediate answer or to a question, or to say, let me get back with you on something, so that that parent knows that somebody is there to listen if they have a concern.
Been thinking about that idea of the how are you kicking off the year, and I appreciate that you really brought it down to how are people experiencing entry into your building and the connections. And I think about, and I'm sure Craig and you too, Kevin, moving from school to school, schools feel different depending upon where you go, and it matters, it really does matter. And so when we think about social emotional learning and connecting to other people, it's not just classroom teachers. It is everybody who's involved in the children's lives, the families' lives, from the moment ring that bell outside to the voice you hear asking why you've shown up. It
Right.
all matters, and it all resonates, and it all impacts the feelings that we have in, I think, even to our level of wanting to connect. Um,
Mhm.
and I'm going to switch it up a little bit, thinking about our time. And I
Okay.
want to go back to your children's book.
Okay.
And I want to bring this up because one of my boys has a lot of anxiety, and I'm going to be fully transparent. He gets it from me. And, so I hate that I passed that down, but his is specific around transitions. And so
Okay.
it didn't really kick into gear until fifth grade, but then eighth grade and 12th grade. And so your book here, Dakota Doesn't Have to Worry, is about the pre-K and kindergarten transition, because that's huge for kids. And while we make it this moment of like, wow, this is this huge, and it is like life altering milestone, it's anxious for the kids and for the parents to kind of have that release. And so I think I'd like to hear if you could talk about your book. We're going to have it linked up to Amazon so that people know that where they
Okay.
can go get a copy. But I think it's just as valuable for the parents as it is for the kids to know what this looks like for them. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about the book, what inspired you to start it, and what people can get from their purchase.
Okay, absolutely. And I appreciate the question. So, as a parent engagement specialist, when we were doing enrollment screenings for the children, this is something that would happen. It would begin in the summer and it rolled well into the school year, which really began mid-August. But during the enrollment screenings, you ask the children questions and you expect them to be able to perform a certain task based on their age. What we found is many children had never held a pencil, maybe because their parents didn't want them to write on the wall. They didn't have a ball to play with or anyone to catch or throw a ball to, maybe because they were the only sibling. And there were other milestones like this. Problem solving was the big one. Problem solving milestones and just social interaction. We teach our children not to talk with a stranger, but if that stranger is the screener and asking a question that's pertinent to how that child is placed in a classroom, then we need to be able to help that child feel comfortable in the presence of the parent, in the presence of the screener, so that that child is properly placed and that their answer or lack of response is not misunderstood and that child is placed in a classroom that they don't belong in. Right. So after seeing this for about 2 years, probably close to three, I said, man, there's got to be a solution to this. Sometimes we'll say, hey, these are the things that you need to bring to enrollment, but we won't prep them on what that child should have learned or they should have taught during that coming of age before they get to an enrollment screening. A lot of parents, as loving as we can be, as much as we try to protect our child and be there for that child, education is not really the thing we're trying to bring to them when they're a year old, 2 years old, 3 years old. We think that just loving them, feeding them, taking them to fun places is enough. But really, all those things are a part of the learning process, and we have to prepare them for formal education. So there's that component. And you can also factor in the fact that some parents are extremely protective to their child and they do not enroll their child in school until they absolutely have to, until it's legally mandated, which in some cases is not until that child is 6 or 7 years old, which means that that child is missed out on probably 3 years of learning by not having gone to a preschool. That's socialization, that's language exposure, that's, colors and shapes and just all kinds of interactions. And so that's a deficit that shows up when that child goes through an enrollment screening. And so the book was meant to give parents a heads up on the things that they should probably be teaching their child before they get to kindergarten. And those things are meant to help them get the best start in education that they possibly could.
I love that. And especially, and even being, a high school teacher, I was talking to some of my elementary friends, and Craig, you're probably going to laugh at this. And Kevin, you would get it right away too. But my friends were like, kids need to learn how to put their own coat on. And I'm like, they're like, we can't zipper and button all 20 kids up and have them outside. I'm like, oh my gosh, like it had never been in my experience because I've only had the two kids. But things like that how can we help prep kids for independence as
Absolutely.
well as some pieces. Yeah, so I love that. And I think that's a fantastic resource for our parents. And like I said, even if we are in education, but this is not the level that I work in, I didn't know a lot of these things. And so I relied on my friends in education to help me with that.
And just imagine if you don't have that connection with a person in education, how would you know until you show up at that screening and you see your child perform poorly? And now, as a parent, you're embarrassed because you feel as if you failed your child. Because truly, if that score comes back, and they say, oh, well, your child has some deficits, we need to have some additional resources for your child, you're thinking, wow, what happened? What didn't I do? So this is meant to help, correct that sense and just get kids on the best path that they could be on.
Yeah. Thank you. And for those of you who are listening, check out the link in the notes because you can take it right to Amazon to get this for you. I'm going to kick it back over to Craig for our ever famous question that we ask all guests. And Kevin, I've been trying not to tell you about it. But
all right, I'm sitting down.
So who has the best pizza? I think is the
Oh my goodness. So the best pizza, hands down, St. Louis area. This is Emo's Pizza. Now, a lot of people have not heard of Emo's. When you think of Emo's Pizza, you're going to say that pizza is as thin as a playing card. They call that pepperoni on that. It's like a nickel-sized slice of pepperoni. But this stuff is so good. Man, if you come to St. Louis or the St. Louis area, you better make sure you have a slice of Emo's Pizza because you will not forget it. You will not forget
really.
it. You can eat a whole pizza by yourself, so that's one of the benefits, and you will still have room for dessert, but it is, to me, that good.
Well, that's good to know. So I'm gonna ask the second question that is,
All right.
top of mind and our question, that we ask all the guests. Now, that's a good new question. Like, okay, what do you think about pizza? What is the best pizza? Because people are traveling and I'm getting hungry. So, what, we do ask every person because we feel like, you are luminous in to so many may not who may not have the best days and they are struggling in the shadows of whatever's going on. And for some reason, your presence, your smile, you wrap your arm around them and give them a hug represents so much. And you've already shared so many gifts with us, but what do you feel at this point in your life is your superpower?
Wow. I would say my superpower is just being able to make someone have a little bit of a laugh at themselves through some insight. I like to kind of twist stories up and just kind of have people look at the glass, the half of the glass that's full, right? Instead of the half that's empty. So when you take a moment to analyze the situation and you can do that, you can, pretty much bring them to a more positive conclusion. And, again, I'm not always serious, even though I always have a serious face. When I throw a joke in, people are surprised. And so I think that's the superpower that I have.
do you have any go-to jokes that you like to pull out, like back pocket jokes?
No, it's not even that kind of joke. Not even like a, three guys went to the corner store kind of joke. It's, I would say that because of the audiences that I've worked with in the past, I am always analyzing a situation, right? And so I take a little bit of pride in being able to assess a situation even as I'm walking up to it and just kind of pull out something that's, situationally relevant and just kind of putting that out there for people to take a look at.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So for folks who are excited and ignited to connect with you, would love to lean in a little bit more about some of the magic that you carry with you to support the needs of young people and their caregivers and families on a day-to-day basis. How will they go about doing that?
Well, you can reach me at my email address, which is kevin.hopkins@estl189.com. That's because I'm an employee of East St. Louis School District 189. So again, that's kevin.hopkins@estl189.com. If you'd like, I can send you a link to our weekly virtual parent meeting. You can just kind of sit in and interact with the parents that are there, just kind of contribute to the topic of the day. And if you like even more, we could send you some links to some of the virtual workshops that we have. And that ranges from, things like the history of East St. Louis to mental health, to SEL conversations, just a variety of things, and even the legal components of enrollment. So we have a lot of community partners that we bring on to interact with and just kind of help counsel our parents. So I'm welcome. I'm happy to share any of those resources, with anyone.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
Well, SEL and EDU family, it has been phenomenal. We have had the incredible and incomparable Kevin Hopkins, who has been here with us. And so you better do all the things so that you can get saddled up and ready. That is a Cowboy Carter reference. Yes, it is. And all of the magic that he brings to the wonderful people of St. Louis and beyond. So until we meet again, we want you to hold you and yours real tight, and we want you to continue to stand strong, 10 toes deep in that great, mighty light. We love you, and we will talk to you again soon. Amen.